Welcome back. So in the last video, I went and defined the three main types of ghosts that I think are good points to cover on the matter. In this video, I'm going to be taking a more in-depth look at each category and picking them apart piece by piece to try and assess how much validity each one of them actually has. Let's start with the intelligent haunting again, because I think this one probably has the most fiction attached to it, and I've always found it easier to break things down than to build them up. So, intelligent hauntings, are they legit? First off, what do we know about them? Well, we know that in order to become a ghost, you presumably have to be dead. An intelligent haunting requires the ghost in question to be aware that it's dead, or at least hold some form of awareness of its immediate surroundings. The first thing this claim requires is for us to accept that ghosts exist, that is, that it is somehow possible for a person to die and maintain either their physical appearance, their mental state, or both. This is a pretty extraordinary claim in and of itself. It assumes one of two things. Either there is some kind of energy, let's call it a soul, that encompasses an individual's personality and memories. I'd call that the frontal lobe, but maybe that's just me. Or that energy, or more specifically the electricity that helps power our brain, can somehow transcend bodily form to become trapped within some Swedenborgian plane of existence. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist and I'm not a physicist, but I do have a little bit of background in both areas. Either way, I'm not professing to know more than someone who may have studied this extensively, so from here on in, speculation. That said, looking at these two claims, we can't measure or test the validity or even the existence of a soul, so that's off the table. What we're left with is this idea that energy or electricity, whichever you like, can somehow leave the body after death and maintain some kind of tangible form. Sounds extreme, huh? Well, consider this. Imagine you're at a beach, lots of sand, lots of water, and you've got a bucket. Now, under normal circumstances, when you put sand into your bucket and tip it over, all the sand falls out because there's nothing to hold it in place. You can do this with your hands too. Just pick up the sand and it flies right through your fingers. However, if you add water, something interesting happens. The sand starts to stick together. So you fill your bucket with wet sand and what happens? Well, you turn that bucket over and voila, a sand castle. The sand maintains the form of the bucket even after the bucket has been pulled away. Starting to sound familiar? If sand is the ambiguous energy that makes up a ghost, then water would be your traumatic event and death would simply be the removal of the bucket. A sandcastle will stay in place until someone comes along to smooth it out, or it's naturally knocked over. Of course, the sandcastle hypothesis does not by any means provide a valid argument for the existence of ghosts, simply a possible explanation. In order to reach the bottom of this, we're going to have to dig a little deeper. Let's say the sandcastle hypothesis was viable. It'll be our first leap of faith, if you will. Ghosts exist and this is how it happens. Okay, fine, I'll give you that. You can look at how energy can be transferred, how electric current can travel, how the brain is comprised of neural pathways, currents, chemicals, the like. Then taking into account the environmental electromagnetic fields and that kind of thing, we're going to assume that for the sake of argument, some combination of these things can result in a ghost. It's a popular held belief that ghosts are created through violent events. Let's say that a violent event produces a lot of energy, and death results in a release of that energy. Therefore, under the right environmental conditions, the released energy can become trapped, if you will, due to a mixture of environmental factors as well as the energy exerted by the violent event. Okay, it's a leap, but it's not too big of a gap to get across. The issue, however, is the second leap. Leap number 2. Intelligent hauntings require that our ghost is somehow capable of retaining its memory, as well as being able to interact with things and presumably form new memories, though I'll address that in a moment. Here's the problem. Our memories as human beings are stored in our brains. You can argue for cellular memory, and yes, it's a thing, but it's still related to biology. Once someone dies, be it your brain or your cells, the memory is going to break down. We're not even talking about recovering memory from dying organs. We're talking about memories somehow existing outside of the realm of what could be considered a storage device. I'll give an example based on something I'm familiar with. A computer's hard disk is a storage device. Memory and files are stored on the computer's hard drive. This data is transferred and recovered via a series of signals and requests sent from the CPU or the processor. In English, data doesn't just spawn, it has to be stored somewhere in order for it to be retrieved or accessed. Same goes for the brain. You can't remember information you don't have, and information is stored in our brains. I've never once heard of a case of someone's energy projecting a memory, but maybe that's just me. Either way, the point is that memories need to be stored. If you don't have a storage device to hold it, you're not going to be able to get to it. Now, we know that electricity can carry information. Think like an iPod, or I guess it's the iPhone now. Anyway, you plug in the headphones and some little chip with your music stored on it sends a signal through the wire and then you hear it. The headphones are simply a conduit for the data being transferred via the electrical current. Without that chip, you've got nothing. That said, how do you reason that a ghost, a non-physical entity comprised of energy or current, is somehow capable of storing all this memory or personality, and better yet, somehow managing to create new ones? Even if we come to the conclusion that yes, there is some way for current or energy to collect data and store it, this does not mean you're going to get sentience from that. At best, what you're looking at is an imprint or an illusion of intelligence, data stored as energy within space. Now, science does not fully understand all there is to know about the human brain, but when we're talking about ghosts, that's no longer relevant. So where is this alleged memory or personality coming from? How is it stored or retrieved for that matter? And how would your ghost be able to create new memories? Our second leap here requires a fuck ton of gymnastics. Even if you were somehow able to come up with a viable explanation for preserving memory or personality, you're going to wind up with a very confused ghost. Picture this. You get offed in some horrible way and now you're a ghost. Your memories are preserved by some magical force yet to be named, but you are now incapable of forming new memories, mainly because you don't have a brain anymore. You know you're dead, and you remember everything that happened before, but you can't remember anything new. You're basically the ghost equivalent of Guy Pearce from Memento. Now, people will use this to argue that, oh, that's why ghosts are violent, they're scared, they don't know what's going on, they can't form any new memories. And this leads me to category number 2, the poltergeist. So we have a violent ghost who's scared shitless because it's got no way to form new memories. So like an escaped mental patient, its only instinct is to lash out at everyone and everything. Sound viable? Maybe at first, but look at what's being asserted here. A metaphysical being who is nothing but energy and possibly some kind of current is somehow capable of physically interacting with a physical environment. While energy can be a powerful thing, without anything physical behind it, how are you going to channel that? Energy is expended during physical activity, so how does energy expend itself? Is that even possible? I honestly don't know, so I'm going to leave that as an open debate. However, there are claims that ghosts pull energy from things like technology or heat, and again, what is the method by which they are doing this? Either way, poltergeist activity has something going for it that the intelligent haunting doesn't. It's a little bit easier to document. Now, people are going to be like, well, I've seen it, or how can you say that intelligent hauntings haven't been documented? They're all over TV. My first response to this is, it's TV. You don't know what goes on behind a camera. Those ghost hunting shows are there for entertainment. The people on those shows are making a lot of money to produce ghosts. They're paid to give the audience something to gawk at. Sure, it's fun to watch and speculate about, but what goes on in the editing room has paycheck written all over it. Now, in terms of poltergeist, it's the same thing. Again, you take the sandcastle hypothesis stating that ghosts exist, and then you have to take this second leap of spontaneous memory generation, followed by this final leap of a metaphysical thing somehow interacting with a physical environment. While I do not have a background in physics to verify the feasibility of this, let's play devil's advocate and assume that this is in fact possible. Then the question comes down to, do humans, or dead humans, have the kind of energy capable of transcending the barrier between the physical realm and the metaphysical realm, often known as Swedenborgian space, a separate plane of existence, or limbo? Personally, I seriously doubt it. The amount of energy you would need to do something like that, assuming these places actually exist, would be astronomical. Even in areas where the alleged space between perceived planes is thinner, it would still be difficult. We're talking about something that is non-physical, acting upon a physical thing. Now, unless your ghost is a force of nature, in which case you should be able to measure it, I find this highly subjective. A lot of people might return with, well, that's why it's rare, but the problem is it's not. Again, we see it on TV all the time. Obviously, most of this is crap, but I do think that there is a small, and I do mean small, percentage of this stuff that just can't be explained as of yet. Still, human spirits are not the answer. And here comes category number 4 again, I'm not going to cover the topic of inhuman spirits here, but I think your poltergeist activity can be better explained through picking apart concepts behind entities and phenomenon completely separate from humans in general. Again, that's a conversation for another time. That said, poltergeist activity, unlikely, at least from a human perspective. So where does that leave us? Well, my personal favorite, the recurring haunting, your ghost trapped between space and time. Although maybe ghost isn't even the right word for it, considering it's not conscious and probably isn't even a person, at least not in the sense that we define it. So we're going to have to make a leap here using sandcastle hypothesis again, stating that ghosts can exist, or rather energy can be trapped in space in a tangible form. The recurring haunting is unique in a way that it doesn't require an extraordinary amount of belief-based speculation to explain. Unfortunately, it does require an extraordinary amount of physics that probably go well beyond the best of us, including myself. Based on what I know, I'll do what I can to make a plausible case. Again, this is just a hypothesis. Now, I don't want this to become a conversation on space-time, but I'm going to have to delve a little bit into quantum mechanics here. So, you've got space and time. Different things, right? Not necessarily. According to the theory of relativity, obviously time is relative. That's why when you get closer to the event horizon of a black hole, time perceptibly slows down. Again, I'm going to keep this brief. I might make a separate video on these theories later. Anyway, time and space go hand in hand. Some people believe they're separate, but I tend to think time is more of an illusion. The human description paints time as a linear construct, but that's only because we perceive it to be. Time is the measurement of distance between two spaces, the way we measure the space between today and tomorrow, or the present and the past. But in reality, everything that has occurred or will occur is occurring at the same time. The present is the only thing that exists. We perceive past and future based on our linear view of time. However, what we're actually seeing is the expansion of space, time being the distance between those spaces. Now you're probably wondering, how the fuck does this relate to ghosts? Well, under the assumption that time is an illusion, specifically the past, the idea of a recurring haunting starts to make a bit more sense. Space travel is often spoken about in science fiction as the bending of space to create wormholes between 2 points. This ties into the event horizon of a black hole where space begins to bend, thus time perceptively slows down. So what if, and again this is just a hypothesis, what if a recurring haunting is not a ghost at all, but a glitch in time? A moment in space where reality is flawed, bent in on itself. What if what you're seeing is not a dead person, but two spaces overlapping? The space that occupies the past and the space that occupies our present. This could account for why it constantly repeats, and it also possibly explains the unhinging ability of ghosts to walk through solid matter. The question then becomes not whether or not the ghost is there, but rather what is the phenomenon that's allowing us to see it. A little bit off the deep end? Maybe, but that's why it's called speculation. So where does that leave us? Well, aside from the demonstrous amount of comments that are going to be railing at me about having had supernatural experiences, it leaves us with a few things. The first is that in order for ghosts, specifically the intelligent and poltergeist variety, to exist, there must be some mechanism by which information from the brain, or personality if you will, can be stored and preserved outside of biological or technological means. The second is that there must be some way for this energy to interact with our physical dimension. Now, mathematically, we know there are something like 10 or 11 dimensions. I don't know the exact number. However, most of them are considered unstable and non-physical. I'm going to cover that more on the non-human issue, but food for thought. Either way, I think it's safe to assume that the concept of an intelligent haunting is an oxymoron, sort of like real-life ghost. If we accept the idea that ghosts can be created through the sandcastle effect, then we're still going to be stuck on the memory issue. If this were in fact plausible by any means, what you would most likely wind up with would be an illusion of an individual who is passed on. Basically an energy-based projection in the form of a mock consciousness. Could it even be called aware? For me, I'm going to have to stamp this one as fiction. I don't think that a person can consciously exist after the death of their brain. Poltergeist, same deal. Now we're talking about physical interactions from a metaphysical perspective. Sorry, I'm going to have to dismiss this one as well, at least in terms of human spirits. The recurring haunt, however, I'd say there might actually be some accuracy to. I'm willing to say that it's possible. Unfortunately, until science has advanced to a point in which these things are testable, we may never know. That being said, what do you do when confronted with hundreds of people who are going to claim that they've had supernatural experiences? I mean, surely they weren't all drug-induced, right? Hell, I've had experiences myself. I grew up in a house that was arguably haunted. Now, the first thing I need to point out here is that we're talking about ghosts. Supernatural encompasses a lot. And while I don't generally like to use that term, for the sake of time and simplicity, we'll call it that. The next video in this series is going to take a look at some of the alleged evidence for ghosts, including photography, EVP, temperature change, infrared, and of course, personal experiences. Stay tuned.